Hey there, and welcome to The Story. I'm Ashley Korslund in for Pat Doris tonight. So you may have heard about this. An incoming weather system is expected to bring us freezing rain and, of course, the threat of ice that comes along with it. So ice on the roads, ice on the trees, ice on the power lines. Really a trifecta from Mother Nature that none of us want. And the forecast models are not backing off either. Within the last couple hours, Multnomah County declared a state of emergency ahead of the storm, and that's why it's tonight's big story. Well, Chief Meteorologist Matt Safino graces us with his presence tonight on The Story. And Matt, you've been giving viewers all the latest forecast modeling this afternoon, but really there's a science behind these types of weather systems and the conditions we're expecting. So tell us about that.
Oh yeah, it's a very vexing question that a lot of people ask me when we get a situation like this, and that is, why are we getting freezing rain and not just snow? And I got to tell you, I remember as a teenager when I had a job pumping gas and it was raining on me and it was like 23 degrees. I was asking myself that question and vowed I'd figure it out someday. So again, it is one of those questions that deserves an explanation, and here is why it happened. So this just covers all types of precipitation, well, except for hail, but all kinds of precipitation that we get that is steady and widespread. Above freezing air, indicated by this orange wedge here, okay? When all of the air is above freezing from very high up down to the surface, we get just plain rain. In fact, all of our precipitation will begin as snow, very high up in the clouds, even in the summertime, but then it hits the warm layer, it melts, and it's just rain. That's the normal situation. The freezing level here can vary, and that's why we get snow down to 1,000 feet. Sometimes it's 4,000 feet, but for the most part, that's what happens. But when we get into what we call an overriding situation, where the warm air is riding over a wedge of cold air that cuts underneath it, that's when we start getting weird types of frozen precipitation. So when you start getting just a shallow layer of warm air here, then you end up getting freezing rain because you get snow, it melts into rain, and then it falls into the shallow layer of cold air, okay? And it refreezes on contact. It's falling as it hits the ground, but the ground temperatures and the air temperatures we're experiencing are below freezing, so that liquid freezes on contact. But if this wedge of below freezing air is a little bit deeper and the wedge of above freezing air is a little shallower, then what happens is this. You get snow, it begins to melt, okay, into rain, and it does, but then it reaches the below freezing air, and it has enough time because the air wedge of below freezing air is thicker that it refreezes before it reaches the ground. And so it falls as ice pellets or sleet. That's that situation. And then, of course, you get the normal situation where it's just cold everywhere, so it falls as snow from the clouds and it reaches snow at the ground. We're going to be in this situation here. Now, we'll begin here, and then the warm air comes in, and we go to sleet and freezing rain, and eventually all rain. That's why we get these mixed precipitation types. We need it to be cold throughout the column of the atmosphere to get all snow, and that does happen here occasionally, and that's how it's going to start. But then this warm air begins to move in, and that's when we get into freezing precipitation. So here's a look at the cold air coming down through Montana. We're on the western periphery of this really cold air mass here. That also sets up the gorge wind, which keeps funneling and sourcing that cold air west of the Cascades, so it keeps us in the deep freeze. But that cold air layer, like I just showed you, is very, very shallow. And what happens next is the nasty part. You get the warm air, the Pacific moisture, riding in over the top. So think about that wedge situation I just showed you. This is the warm stuff coming in aloft. This is the cold stuff down at the ground level. And that's how we end up with freezing rain and sleet, beginning as snow and then transitioning to sleet and freezing rain, which is exactly what's going to happen during the day on Thursday. For the gorge, where that cold air wedge is deeper, you'll get snow longer, so you get 4 to 6 inches of snow. Then it'll be ice, and of course, there's also bitter cold and dangerous wind and wind chills there, and in the Cascades. And even the Cascades will end up getting some freezing rain because of that warm air coming in aloft, and then just cold air, very shallow of cold air down at the ground level. So that's how we end up with mixed precipitation types. So I want to talk about the temperatures too, though, because this is something that's very important. It's going to get really cold. Look at our record low for today, 13. Really, really cold. So it can get this cold in December. It's happened several times. The records are all in the teens, but the frequency of that is really low. Look at it this way. In December in Portland, we see low temperatures below 25 degrees only 5.8% of the time. So if you take all the days throughout the historical record back to about 1938, we've dropped below 25 in December only 5.8% of the time, below 20 degrees only 2.4% of the time. and below 15 only 1% of the time. And this is roughly the same for January as well. December and January are two coldest months. So while it does happen, Ashley, as you can see, it's really rare to see temperatures in the teens.
Yeah, and the warm up, Matt, Saturday into Sunday?
It'll be late Friday night or Saturday. This cold air that comes through the gorge, it's very, very stubborn. It can be hard to scour it out, but I think by Saturday we'll be fine in the valleys. The gorge may have to wait till Sunday. All
right, Matt, thank you. Well, with the potential of ice coming this way, many of you might be thinking back to our last ice storm, and it was a doozy during Valentine's Day weekend, you remember, in 2021. Now, we're not saying that this week's storm will be that bad, but it's just important to remember what ice is capable of so that way you can prepare ahead of time, ideally tonight or tomorrow. All right, let's take a look back at February 2021. At the time, the National Weather Service said Portland tied a record for a single-day snowfall in February, but it was the freezing rain and ice that came afterward that had the biggest impact. Around an inch of ice accumulated in the central Willamette Valley. Some spots like Oregon City got an inch and a half. Wow, can you believe that? Yeah, the weight of the ice brought down countless trees and branches, many of them carrying thousands of power lines down with them.
And at that point, the trees were already starting to snap. So everyone that I've spoken to, no one slept all night long because it was just like firecrackers going off constantly. And then all the transformers that were blowing up, it was like fireworks.
Yeah, it was bad. In some areas like Woodburn, down power lines effectively trapped people in their neighborhoods.
And there's power lines down all the way across the road this way and all the way across the road this way. There is absolutely no way for me to leave my house.
At its peak that weekend, 250,000 PGE customers were without power. Tens of thousands were in the dark without heat for several days before the power was restored. Many others went without power for well over a week. The governor even declared a state of emergency for the greater Portland area that weekend. And of course, the cleanup efforts took weeks, if not months, to get all the tree debris taken care of. Arborists were overwhelmed with calls, and counties around the metro area had their hands full collecting trees and branches and sending them through the chipper. Now, again, want to reiterate, we're not trying to forecast that this week's ice event will be as bad as that one, but we just want you to be prepared for the possibility of extended power outages and very limited travel at the least, especially with the holiday season in full swing. Not ideal timing. Well, in our investigative series called Uncommitted, we explore the high standards for forced mental health care in Oregon and Washington, otherwise known as civil commitment. Our team also highlighted the lengthy delays for people with severe mental illness who are accused of crimes, having to sit in jail cells for weeks, sometimes much longer, as they wait for beds to open up at the Oregon State Hospital in Salem so they can complete court-ordered treatment. Now, the state of Washington is dealing with the same problem. Not enough beds at the state hospital to treat people with severe mental illness who don't understand the charges against them. Keeping defendants who are mentally ill behind bars for months on end is unconstitutional, and especially in cases of solitary confinement, researchers say it can amount to an act of torture. And right now, there are hundreds of these defendants in county jails across Washington. Susanna Frame with our sister station in Seattle has the story.
This is Josh Stoller, who has a form of schizophrenia in what's called the cage in the Chelan County Jail in Wenatchee. 6 years ago, he was locked up in the cage, or in here, this solitary confinement cell no bigger than a parking stall, not for days or weeks, but for a solid year, 23 hours a day.
It's hard to think about because here you are in this confined box.
Josh was in psychosis with voices shouting frightening messages.
This is the end of your life. We'll let you know when we're going to kill you. The stuff and nightmares.
That sounds like the ultimate description of human suffering.
Yeah.
In 2015, police found writings about threats to kill and a list of people in Josh's apartment. He was charged with attempted murder, charges he says he didn't understand.
Obviously, I did something wrong, or else I wouldn't be in there, but I didn't understand.
During those months in solitary confinement, Josh deteriorated. A jail counselor wrote he hears voices all day. Very mean people are telling him his parents are dead, he'll die in prison, and he's seeing spiders and cockroaches in his cell.
Did you even want to be living?
No.
Right now in the state of Washington, there's a record number of mentally ill people suffering long and unconstitutional delays in the criminal justice system. Behind bars, they're waiting for court-ordered treatment, help to restore their mental health so they can understand the charges against them. It's never been this bad. 1 year ago, 250 people were waiting for a bed at a state psychiatric hospital. Today, that's jumped to roughly 850 people. In just 1 year, a 140% increase.
I don't know how to quantify that type of horrific experience.
In court, we heard details of the suffering.
He is essentially in a cage 23 hours a day, and the impact on his mental health is not lost on this court.
Ms. Johnson desperately needs medical attention, and each day that she spends compounds that harm.
I'm being subjected to solitary confinement in this jail without treatment.
I absolutely believe you and understand that you are suffering up in solitary. I absolutely believe that.
Is jail one of the worst places for someone with a serious mental illness?
It's not just one of the worst, it is the worst place for a person to be who has a serious mental illness.
Lisa Daly is director of the Treatment Advocacy Center in Washington, D.C. Decades of research shows jail is extremely detrimental to people who are sick with mental illness. A study by the UN called it a form of torture, and the longer the wait in jail, the harder it becomes to get better.
It can really cause irreversible brain damage. Basically, the longer that a person spends in untreated psychosis, the harder it is for them to return to the same level of functioning once they're actually receiving treatment again.
So it's a lot of resources, a lot of energy invested in trying to turn this number around, and unfortunately, we've not been successful in doing that.
DSHS says the biggest challenge is the increase in need. In the last 6 years, the number of people sitting in jails like here at King County needing help at a state psychiatric hospital has nearly doubled, nearly twice as many people in the last 6 years. Doctors Thomas Kinlan and Brian Wablinger are high-ranking officials at the Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, which runs Western State Hospital. The state agency's been in hot water for the delays for 7 years. In 2015, a federal judge ruled a bed must be available in 7 days. But in some cases, it's now taking 7 months, making DSHS in contempt of court.
We knew ahead of time that services would be increasing over time. We knew that. Can you look into a crystal ball and predict exactly what's going to happen? No.
He got so much worse in jail.
Jerry Clark's son, Calvin, of Vancouver, Washington, landed in both the King and Clark County jails while sick with bipolar disorder.
It added terror to horror.
Jerry says after a month behind bars, they didn't recognize their son.
The system had plenty of time to figure out how to help him appropriately, and instead traumatized him, and his illness got worse. No one wants to believe that somebody that you love that deeply could ever experience what we went through. It is unbelievable what happened to my son. It's unbelievable.
Before the onset of his mental illness, Calvin was a skilled surfer, scholar, and state champion debater. He got a college scholarship for debate. But Calvin never finished college. 9 months after getting out of jail at the age of 23, he died by suicide.
Do you think your son could be alive today if he wouldn't have been incarcerated while he was so mentally ill?
Yeah. I believe that because of his incarcerations, he felt like he had been pushed to the bottom of society and discarded.
Josh Stoller's come a long way since his time in jail. He's a new dad and engaged to be married. He's also advocated for change in Olympia. That's Josh standing right by the governor at a 2019 signing of a bill aimed at decreasing wait times in jail. He'd hoped conditions had changed, and they have. Timelines for getting help have gotten worse, not better.
I'm pissed. Very, very angry about that. If you let people languish in the conditions of county jails for that long, I would consider that a crime against humanity.
Wow. So what is DSHS doing to at least try to fix this problem? Well, one solution is to build more facilities to create more beds for these patients. Several construction projects are now underway around the state, including one in Clark County that'll break ground this spring. We've been following the progress on the behavioral health facility that'll go into this field in Clark County. It's called the Brockman Campus, and it's off Northeast 50th Avenue in the Mount Vista neighborhood. It's just east of Washington State University's Vancouver campus and just across the street from iTech Prep. That's a school in the Vancouver School District. Now, the facility will include 3 16-bed buildings and will have beds for 48 residents who need behavioral or mental health services. Their treatment could last 90 to 180 days or longer. Clark County has already approved a conditional use permit for the campus, basically the go-ahead for the plan. Construction will start in March or April of 2023, and the facility will likely begin accepting residents in the winter of 2024. All right, so here's how it'll work. So say somebody's arrested for a crime and considered to be a danger to themselves or somebody else, but jail just might not be the best option. Instead, a judge might drop their charges and have the person civilly committed to a community-based setting like the Brockman campus, where they can receive specialized treatment.
The goal is to, get them the treatment that they need, and then get them back into a wraparound services situation where they have housing supports, they have social workers, they have somebody watching over their medication. But we want to get them off on the right foot. So we want to make sure that if they do have a stay with us through DSHS, once they discharge, we don't want to see them come back. We want to see them, ultimately live in their community and be, contribute to a positive contributions to their local communities.
And that all starts, though, with creating the beds and the space for people to get this type of treatment. And while most people would agree that this is desperately needed around the state, especially right now, there's still plenty of opposition from neighbors in Clark County who are concerned about the safety elements. It's not so much that they're against the idea of this project, they just don't like the location. And they have a lot of questions about how secure this facility will be. So we asked Tyler Hemstreet with DSHS about that.
This is not a corrections facility. This is a treatment facility. So the folks that are in here, they may have come through the criminal court system at one time, but they wouldn't have any pending charges when they are at this facility. But nevertheless, it's key controlled, all the security cameras. And no one will go unescorted anywhere in and out of the facility. We have certain no-climb fencing in our recreation areas. We understand it's hard. We're kind of the new kid on the block coming into a site that has not been developed in a very long time, and building a facility that not a whole lot of people know about. So, but we want to answer these questions. We want to have productive conversations with residents.
You can tell it's obviously a very complicated, nuanced topic that has a lot of different perspectives worth discussing. It's an important conversation to have. So we'll make sure we keep following the progress on this facility out in Clark County, and we'll keep you posted on details.
Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler has a plan to tackle homelessness. He wants to ban camping and set up huge outdoor homeless shelters. Well, now the Biden administration is saying that's the exact wrong thing to be doing. We'll have details about the president's blueprint to handle homelessness when the story returns.
The Biden administration has a big plan to reduce homelessness. It follows a model that gets people into housing first, and then it works to address the reasons they became homeless in the first place. The administration is trying to reduce homelessness by 25% in the next 2 years. To give you some numbers here, right now, as of the last point-in-time count, which counts where people slept on one given night, there are more than 500,000 people who are homeless across the country. In Multnomah County, more than 5,200 people were counted as experiencing homelessness on that night of the last point-in-time count. That was in January of this year. That's about 30% higher than it was before the pandemic. The actual number of people who are homeless, though, is likely much higher. That point-in-time count can really miss a lot of people who are homeless, including people who might be staying with friends or family at the time the count was done. The Biden administration put together a group of several different agencies that includes hundreds of people who have been homeless themselves. They're all going to work together on a federal strategic plan to end homelessness. The plan goes over the root causes of homelessness, including racist housing policies, lack of affordable housing, wage inequality, and lack of access to health care. It encourages policies that address those root causes and keeps people in their homes, like rent assistance to prevent evictions, as well as shelter options like hotels, small transitional units, and low-income housing rather than large congregate shelters. It also strongly discourages banning camping and the use of homeless camp sweeps. The report states, as elected leaders respond, and not always in the most effective ways, some have resorted to clearing encampments without providing alternative housing options for the people living in them. Many communities have made it illegal for people to sit or sleep in public outdoor spaces, or have instituted public space design that make it impossible for people to lie down or even sit in those spaces. Unless encampment closures are conducted in a coordinated, humane, and solutions-oriented way that makes housing and supports adequately available, these out-of-sight, out-of-mind policies can lead to lost belongings and identification, which can set people back in their pathway to housing and disrupt the work of ending homelessness. Now, the president is encouraging state and local governments to use that federal strategic plan really as a blueprint to address homelessness in their communities. So Portland Mayor Ted Wheeler's plan to address homelessness includes a lot of the things the Biden plan discourages. So it bans camping. It would set up large congregate shelters for those who are homeless. And despite all of that, Wheeler says he's on board with the president's plan. He tweeted this out: "This plan is a positive signal that the Biden administration takes these challenges seriously. I appreciate the expertise and hard work put into this plan. Now it is time for action." We reached out to the mayor's office about this. He says the plan to build those giant camps is still undoubtedly moving forward, at least until more affordable housing is available. Still to come here on The Story. First it was California, then the state of Washington, and now Oregon joins in too. All the West Coast states have now all agreed to do something that will drastically change the way we think about transportation. And it's all meant to help reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We'll have details when The Story comes back. By the year 2035, every new car sold in Oregon will be electric. That's the edict from state regulators who voted yesterday to ban the sale of new gas-powered cars and trucks in just 12 years, all in the name of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Environmental reporter Cale Williams has the story.
The motion passes. Thank you, everyone, for that.
In a 4-1 vote Monday afternoon, Oregon's Environmental Quality Commission voted to ban the sale of new gas-powered cars in the state by 2035. The move falls in line with the state's plans to cut greenhouse gas emissions by at least 90% by 2050 and follows similar votes in California and Washington. The new rule sends a clear signal to both car makers and electric utilities that the future of transportation on the West Coast is going to be electric. That's according to Leah Felden, interim director of the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality.
Bring the cars here, bring your infrastructure here, and for the grid, get it ready.
More than 700 people submitted comments after the rule was proposed earlier this year, and the vast majority of them were supportive. Some folks did have concerns, though, which Commissioner Greg Addington, the sole vote against the rule, raised in Monday's meeting.
You know, I just think there's a whole lot of people in this state that don't get where this is going and why it's going there.
Addington said the people he's spoken to are worried about a lack of charging stations in rural parts of the state, and whether the rule would ban all gas-powered vehicles completely. Commissioner Molly Kyle said that last point was a common misconception.
That this is often being shortened to a ban on gas cars in Oregon, and that's not true.
While the rule will ban the sale of new gas cars, Oregonians will still be able to buy and register used vehicles of any type. Officials estimated that by 2035, when new cars will be fully electric, more than half the cars on the road will still be powered by gas. Meredith Connolly, Oregon director of the nonprofit advocacy group Climate Solutions, said the concerns about the charging network are valid, but there are sizable investments coming to Oregon to build out a more robust network, especially in rural parts of the state.
It's important to remember that this transition to electric vehicles and electric appliances is not happening overnight, but is a transition over a decade and plus.
The rule builds in a slow ramp-up of electric vehicle sales, too, starting with 35% of sales in 2026 and increasing each year until it hits 100% in 2035. Connolly said getting the grid ready and putting in more charging stations will have to follow suit.
Building out that public charging network, filling in those gaps, that's the work of the next decade.
Cale Williams, KGW News.
And in case you missed it right at the beginning of Cale's story, the state of Washington also has a ban on new gas-powered cars by 2035, also joining California, meaning the entirety of the West Coast will not have new gas-powered vehicles for sale in just about 12 years from now. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this topic. In fact, we are planning to do a series on electric vehicles here on The Story next month. We would love to feature your comments. You can send an email to thestory@kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090. All right, stick with us. We're back after this. All right, that's the end of our show. Thanks for watching. Pat will be back right